Good afternoon, everyone. We've still got quite a few people dialing in, so I'll just give it 1 minute and then we will get started. Okay, it does look like the people coming into the meeting has slowed down a little bit, so I will get started. Thank you for joining us or joining me this afternoon for a non-mandatory briefing about a request for tender that we currently have live for development of a family and domestic violence workforce capability framework for Western Australia. My name is Nicole Leggett. I'm the Executive Director of the Office for Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence. I wanted to start by acknowledging that I am joining you today from Woolyallup on Whadjuk Noongar Budja and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And also just start, I suppose, with a little bit of housekeeping about this briefing. Firstly, that the briefing is being recorded. It will be made available on Tenders WA as a supplementary resource to the tender request document, but there will be a delay, probably 2 to 3 days for that. So how we will manage that in the interim is any questions and answers that we take during this briefing, we'll publish on Tenders WA as a written record so that you and other people have access to that information before the full recording becomes available. So what I would ask is that as we're going through, if you've got any questions, please can you post them in the chat and we'll deal with all the question and answer component at the end of the briefing. And then that gives us the easiest opportunity to give a good record of those questions and the answers we've provided, which we can add as an addendum on Tenders WA tomorrow. So I'm going to just start to move through the presentation. I know we've just had a few people join us. Thank you and welcome. I'm going to start by offering a little bit of background, and I know that some of you have heard this a few times now, so my apologies for repeating myself. But could I also ask that everyone is on mute because there's just a little bit of background information, noise. Thank you. So this request is one of 4 that we have live on Tenders WA at the moment. All 4 relate to a body of work that was arising out of the Family and Domestic Violence Task Force, which was convened between September of last year and March of this year. So one of the things that came out of the task force, which was initiated by the government essentially to provide advice about how we strengthen responses to family and domestic violence in Western Australia, was a system reform plan. And the Family and Domestic Violence System Reform Plan is largely focused on the ways that we can strengthen and improve responses to family and domestic violence within the existing footprint of services and organisations that are responding. So it's how we lift our capacity, how we lift our capability, how we provide consistent and quality responses to victim survivors of family and domestic violence and also to perpetrators of violence. So within the system reform plan, there are 17 related actions under 4 pillars or 4 domains. And those domains are workforce development, risk assessment, risk management, and information sharing. So the piece of work that I'm talking to you about today is an action that sits in the workforce development pillar of the system reform plan. And it relates to establishing a workforce capability framework for WA. So the workforce capability framework is really seen as quite a foundational piece of work for our system reform work around family and domestic violence in WA. And it's essentially about setting a standard around the core knowledge and skills that professionals need in government, in non-government services and Aboriginal community-controlled organisations to the core knowledge and skills that they need to respond to family and domestic violence appropriately. It's taken from an understanding that not everybody has the same level of role and responsibility. So the framework in itself needs to have enough flexibility and nuance to recognise that people have different roles in this space and they have different levels of responsibility. And the best working example I can offer you, which I think is something that we provided as a hyperlink in the request document, is the capability framework that exists for family and domestic violence in Victoria. And they scaffold that based on levels of responsibility, if I can represent it that way. And each of those steps in responsibility relates to different knowledge base that's required and skill set that's required. So the scope for the workforce capability framework for Western Australia, much like the example from Victoria, is about setting out the capabilities that we need to see in our sector about people's knowledge and skills for responding to victim survivors, including children and young people, responding to perpetrators, and also around understanding that not everyone's needs are the same and that we need to have diverse and tailored responses to people from a range of different communities and cohorts, including Aboriginal people, people who identify as LGBTQIA+, people with disability, and people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So essentially that a dimension of this project is really about access and inclusion. We are seeking a consultant essentially to do the development work for us around this framework. So we're looking to have a capability framework for WA at the end of this project. In terms of governance, the Department of Communities is the lead contractor, but we're not the only audience for this product. So although we will provide the contract management for the consultant, we will be working with and we'll be supporting the consultant to work with a working group that includes representatives across government, from the community sector, potentially from community members and academia. Essentially, we'll be looking to bring together a working group that is uniquely suited to this project. And it's not limited in terms of what that membership could be. And we'll actually have a meeting about overarching governance group next week. And part of what they will do next week is start to talk about the role and responsibility of this working group as well as the membership. So that's sort of happening in real time to this request being in the market. I've got here a list of the activities that is in the scope document that we are expecting in respect of this piece of work. The way that we have set out these activities, and I will go through it, it starts with looking at working examples from other jurisdictions, including the Victorian example. Doing an early piece of work with our core stakeholders, including our government stakeholders, community sector services, and Aboriginal community-controlled organisations about kind of that levelling around responsibility. So where do people sit on a continuum of responsibility around family and domestic violence? And what's kind of the level of flexibility and nuance that we need to have built into a framework like this so that it can be relevant to a wide audience, but also that it's not so broad that it doesn't actually give that standard of practice and knowledge and skill that we would be looking for. The way that we've currently set these activities up and the sequence of it gives some indication that I guess what we're thinking is that the deep stakeholder engagement would more usefully occur in context of a working draft rather than right at the beginning of the project with a blank piece of paper. So I think we're probably thinking that there's some targeted engagement right up front to get to a working draft capability framework, understanding that there is at least one working model that we can look at and draw on, being Victoria's example. And then we do quite quite comprehensive stakeholder engagement to get to a final product. The other activity that's listed here, although it is the last activity listed, it's probably something that's going to have to be kind of held and managed throughout the whole project. And that's really just about recognising and understanding that this capability framework has dependencies related to other projects and pieces of work that will be happening in real time at the same time as this is in motion. One of the obvious connections is the design of the workforce entity, which is also currently on Tenders WA. And the workforce entity is intended to be an organisation that has responsibility in Western Australia for strategic coordination around workforce development activities for building capability around family and domestic violence. So for that entity, this capability framework will be a foundational and informing piece of work that they scaffold their kind of responsibilities and activities from. Similarly, we're also in market for redevelopment of the Common Risk Assessment and Risk Management Framework, which has an overlap with this piece of work, because common risk assessment is effectively about setting standards of practice, particularly about identifying family and domestic violence and assessing, managing and monitoring risk. So I guess we're well aware that there's multiple things that are going to be happening at the same time across the implementation program for the reform plan. And we will be, I guess, taking responsibility for and trying to support processes of engagement with stakeholders and with our consultants that helps hold this work together as much as possible and helps support sharing of relevant information between projects and helps streamline some of that stakeholder engagement so that we're not kind of stepping over the top of each other across different project areas. The deliverables for this particular project would be a project plan. So essentially, although this scope has a defined set of activities, I guess we just want to have an opportunity to work with the consultant and the working group around what the program of work looks like over the 12-month period, just in that next level of detail, including in relation to timeframes. It's not to say that what you submit in your response will be set aside. We'll essentially be taking your response and just kind of checking it in context of other projects and looking at where there might be opportunities to streamline stakeholder engagement and things like that. So it would just be kind of a finalising rather than redeveloping. And then the other deliverables all really relate to what I've just talked about in terms of producing the capability framework itself. So we would like to see a draft capability framework that is then refined and developed further through stakeholder engagement, leading into a final product. I can't see exactly who's online, but can I check, have I got Simon Doyle online, who's from our procurement team in communities?
Yes, hi, Nicole.
Hi, Simon, would you like to take us through this slide?
Yes, thanks, Nicole. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Just to let you know, just a bit of a rundown on the procurement side of things. As you may be aware, all respondents must be registered on Tenders WA. That's in order to ensure that you can put a submission in, and also in the event that there's any addendum, they will get posted on Tenders WA as well. Just to remind respondents, they're required to answer all of Part B of the request document. That's the content, requirement and respondents' offer. In that part, you'll note that there's two qualitative requirements, both of 50% weighting. That's suitability of proposed services and specified personnel. And we just ask if in putting in your submission, if you can try and restrict your responses to not exceed 5 pages in length per criterion. And also just please ensure that you give yourself enough time to complete your submission. The tender closes at 2:30 on Friday, the 19th of July. and there will be no extensions allowed. This is because the tender box is monitored by Department of Finance, and we have no say in terms of extensions or otherwise. We will accept any questions in regards to the submissions, the request document, and we will post addendum as and when they arise. We will impose a deadline of Monday, the 22nd of July for any questions. That's just to ensure that everyone has enough time to consider the responses to the questions and be able to put in a submission. If anyone has any questions, my contact details are on the request document. That is simon.doyle@communities.wa.gov.au. That's all there. Thanks, Nicole.
Simon, and perhaps Amanda, can I just check something? I think, Simon, you just mentioned a closing date of the 22nd of July. But we've just got up on this slide that it's the 19th.
That's correct. I was reading off the wrong one. That's the 19th. Sorry.
Okay.
Yep. I do apologise. 19th.
So 19th of July at 2:30 p.m. is the closing date for this particular request.
Yep.
So Simon, Tanya's got a question for you, which I'll just bring up. The question is, did you say keep to 5 pages for the total response to all of the qualitative requirements?
No, so that was 5 pages per response. So that's 10 in total.
10 in total is the answer to that question. Thank you, Simon. So a question seeking confirmation about the closing date for questions related to this response. So if the whole tender is closing 19th of July at 2:30 p.m, Simon, when is the last kind of threshold time when people can ask a question?
It'd be probably Monday the 15th would be best. If we get questions after that, it will make it a bit of a scramble for people to respond to any responses. So it's best if we can get the questions in no later than Monday 15th. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. I'll just pause to give people an opportunity to get questions into the chat and maybe just fill a little bit of time while you're putting your questions in, which is that although we're taking questions now, as Simon said, you're welcome to submit questions after this briefing up to the 15th of July, just to give the best time frame for response. Those questions will, you will receive a direct response, and then we'll post an addendum with your question and answer on Tenders WA to provide transparency. Okay, so we do have a few more questions here. So question, is there a preference for consultations to occur face-to-face, or is there scope to conduct consultations via a mix of virtual and face-to-face plus surveying? I think that's a great question, and I guess my initial answer is I think that a mixed approach is appropriate. And I suppose my general feeling about consultation is I generally prefer people to be consulted via the same modality. Like, so if it's online, then it's online, or if it's face-to-face, then it's on face-to-face. And it's not to say you can't have mixed to reach in and access people from different places, particularly regional and remote WA, but I just generally feel like it goes better if everyone's got the same opportunity to access and engage in the consultation that is occurring. So a further question, Simon, about the length of response. So the 5 pages, is that beyond the compliance information or including it?
No, the compliance will be separate. The page restriction is purely in regards to the qualitative aspects of the submission.
Thank you, Simon. So question, in what capacity are you anticipating that we engage with the other stakeholders referenced under governance? academic community, etc. So thank you for the question. That relates to potential composition of the working group that oversights this project, the stakeholder engagement in terms of informing the capability framework will be guided by the working group and guided by the Department of Communities, as well as taking recommendation from the successful consultant. But essentially the stakeholder engagement process will need to be inclusive of agencies and organisations likely impacted by the framework. So who's in scope to be required to kind of operate under that framework. So it will be inclusive of representatives from government agencies. It will be inclusive of representatives from community sector services, from Aboriginal community controlled organisations. And I would expect that the peaks will have a role and will have things that they want to contribute in that space as well. So next question. Are you accepting tenders from consortiums with consultants? Simon, I might defer to you on that one, if that's okay. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Simon.
Yeah, thank you. Nicole, what was the question again?
The question is, are we accepting tenders from consortiums with consultants?
Yes, that's fine. There's no restrictions on that.
Thank you. Next question. Is there any restriction to consultants from other states being involved? Parent company is in another state. Our subject matter expert is in Perth.
No, there's no restriction. No restriction is imposed on that.
So I've got a comment, which is that there can be inequality of voices when there's hybrid consultation methods. Thank you. Next question. The tender page stated that so Simon, this one's for you. The tender page stated that the total project budget is 150,000. Can you please confirm this number, and does it include GST?
Yes, I have made an amendment on the page to indicate that it does include GST. It's inclusive.
So 150,000 is inclusive of GST. Okay. And that is all the questions that we have at the moment. I will pause just for 2 more minutes, stay on the line. But of course, if you think of a question after this briefing, then please don't hesitate to get in touch via Simon, and we will get to your answer as quickly as possible. So the next question is, qualitative requirements refers to addressing the scope of work and requirements. Does this relate to all of Schedule 2, specification / statement of requirements, or just to the statement of requirements? And Simon, I think that this one is the whole lot, specification / statement of requirements.
Yeah, I haven't got the document in front of me, but I think that's the case. It's for the whole component.
Yep. So, yeah. So the answer at this stage is yes, it's for the whole component, but we will confirm that and kind of bold it in the Q&A in the addendum that we get up on Tenders WA tomorrow, just so that you've got that double confirmation. I think it looks like we might be out of questions. So I might finish the briefing here just a little bit early. Thank you again, everyone, for your time and for your consideration of this request. Please, as I said, if you've got additional questions, don't hesitate to get them through to us. We'll get answers through to you as quickly as we can. And we look forward to reading your responses. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.